Hi everyone, I just wanted to make some comments on our first discussion. I wanted to commend all of you of doing a great job of discussing topics that can be very controversial and divisive in ways that relied on evidence and that were quite collegial for the most part. So well done there. I apologize for being a little bit late with this one, but as you can see, I am back from Atlanta. I'm in a much quieter room at the West Side campus here at CNM. Um, so I'm working to get caught up with everything through the rest of today and into tomorrow morning. Just a couple of comments about some of the logistics for the discussion assignments. If you go to My Grades and click on the View Rubric part of the score for this discussion, you will be able to see how I filled out the rubric and also the comments that I left. I didn't leave many comments on the actual history or the content this time around just because I'm trying to catch up, but I will say a few things about that here in just a minute in this video. But that's how you can access that feedback. Um, Also, this is the first time that I've done or I've structured a discussion board this way by asking you to ask follow-up questions of each other and respond to those. I enjoyed reading through all of your responses because it was more like you were talking to each other than discussion boards have sometimes been in the past. Even though we call them discussion boards, they don't always end up being that. So I thought this was a great discussion and move in the right direction in that regard. A couple other comments. Make sure that you cite evidence from the readings and the videos. You don't have to do both, but either or, just as long as you've cited evidence in each one of your response posts. That's one of the requirements of this assignment. We're trying to make sure that we always ground our ideas in evidence from the sources that we're using for class. You don't have to do outside research for that part, but you do need to bring in ideas from the book or from the videos. If make sure that you cite that evidence too. So I know some of you, it was clear that you used some details from the readings and the videos, but you also need to make sure to cite that to show where those ideas and details came from as well. And one last comment before I talk about the history part a little bit is to try to avoid counterfactual questions. I know I put a note about that in the bonus question and in the Unit 1 section on doing effective discussion questions. But when you ask hypotheticals, like how would have history changed if something played out differently, I agree those are very interesting. They can really foment a good discussion, but they often lead us to talk about things that we can't really ground in the evidence. And it's for that reason alone that I ask you to try to avoid them for the purposes of our class, even though they are good discussion starters. So if you have any questions about any of that, please let me know. Just a couple of comments about the controversies over statues. As many of you pointed out in your own responses and your own questions, the controversy over the Oñate statues is similar to the controversies that we've seen very recently about the Confederate flag and Confederate statues throughout the South. I think we had a good discussion kind of back and forth showing kind of different sides, different ways of thinking about this issue. Something I wanted to just add to the discussion is that for many Pueblo people, for the group that sawed off the foot of the statue in Alcalde in the late 90s, for those that protested in El Paso, what's at stake there for them is how history is being recounted and how it's being celebrated. They come from a people whose perspectives have been essentially shut out of mainstream history books, mainstream narratives of the past for over 400 years. That's part of the colonial legacy. So it's not just, there was that initial violence, the initial conquest, then we kind of made up and accommodated and everything worked out well. But in order for those accommodations to work, and in order for the kind of Spanish descended part of society to remain dominant in terms of linking the colony to the empire and so on, many of those narratives, many of those perspectives were taken out of the way that history was told, the way that history was presented. Um, this is similar to some of the comments that we made about the Santa Fe Fiesta. Certainly the Fiesta has been in effect since 1712, at least on and off, but it's come to be something kind of different than it was. And even initially in 1712, the idea behind Fiesta was to create a new narrative about what had happened in the Reconquest a couple of decades earlier, to make Vargas a hero, to claim that the Reconquest had been bloodless, so that society could heal and people could move forward. I do think that's a laudable goal. There's nothing wrong with trying to do that. But the problem can be, again, is that the violence, the bloodshed, was taken out of the equation there. The Reconquest was not bloodless. We saw that in the readings that we did in the Mayo and elsewhere. Vargas had to use force. Even when he regained Santa Fe in 1693, he had to wage very bloody wars against different Pueblo peoples, kind of in the outlying areas from Santa Fe up through the late 1690s. And it was really only the threat of Apaches and raids that caused a lot of Pueblos to kind of finally come back in to participate in the Spanish colonial project. So again, from that perspective, now these things still resonate with people because their side of the story has never been told. Their side of the story has been repressed. And so what we're looking at in a statue or in these commemorations then is another celebratory way of representing the Spanish side of the story while leaving out the others. And I really like the way that many of you brought up ideas about maybe, what could we do to try to tell both sides of the story in this? There aren't easy answers. I don't know what the answer is. But I do understand why people would be upset at celebrating a statue of a person that to them, was a butcher, was someone who brought violence, or who at least represents this colonialism that has kept their side of the story from being told for so long. All of that said, something else we need to keep in mind, something that we'll see in Unit 5, I believe, when we look at the long walk, is the idea that indigenous societies have been very resilient. Their lifeways, their ideas have actually remained in force and have become part of the syncretic or blended cultural patterns that we see in New Mexico, although the European ones have remained kind of dominant. We shouldn't just think of Native peoples in terms of victims, of being victimized. Rather, we should see the ways that they've been able to take control of their own future, their own agency, and in very horrible circumstances retain their culture and retain their values. So I'm going on for a little bit too long. I had a couple other things I wanted to say, but I think I'll leave it here. I look forward to continuing to read your work on Unit 4, and please, as always, let me know if you have any questions or concerns.